Hi everybody, this is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at DevOps, and I am here with DevOps TV at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in Las Vegas 2018. I am here with some wonderfully smart folks in the DevOps space. We're going to be talking a little bit about the future of DevOps, which is obviously a crystal ball conversation. To my immediate left is Wesley Pullen, and to his immediate left is Torsten Volk, and to his immediate left is Nowak. So gentlemen, thank you all for joining me today. I think it's going to be a great conversation. So let's start out by you, Chris. You and I were chatting earlier about conversations that you've been having since you got here at the event, and you were saying that a lot of the things that are on people's minds are eerily similar. So tell us a little bit about what you've been hearing in the space so far.
Yeah, so it was really interesting because, it's the first day in, and there wasn't a lot of people here, but a couple of themes kept popping up. And from different groups, and what they were saying, two things. They talked about value stream mapping, and what they really were trying to get at is, how do I actually look across the value of the entire organization? How do I bring the groups together? And that's a big concern for the folks that came up to me. And then the second one, probably to enable that sort of thing, they were talking about how do we train that sort of thing? How do we use the people that we already have today to really create a DevOps environment without using the assets we have today, the people we have today. So I thought it was interesting. It was those two things over and over.
Yeah. So I've been hearing a lot about value stream mapping also myself, and so I am kind of wondering if that's the kind of the new buzzword in DevOps. There's always got to be a hook that somebody's got to hang their hat on. So do you think that value stream mapping will be kind of the buzzword for the year next year, or what do you guys think?
I think we heard it a lot at the summit last year, and then it was maybe a little bit more of a buzzword, but today we have so many topics in DevOps where we get toward that state of continuously releasing, but we need to see what all of this pain is leading to, right? And where we need to invest strategically. And that is the pain that the customers have, combined with exactly what Chris was just saying in terms of where do I get from where I am today to that state, right? How do I integrate my systems? How do I integrate my developer tools? How do I integrate with functions as a service? All of those modern elements. So it's I think more than a buzzword, because organizations invest a lot to send people here, and that's what they're worried about, right? Why am I spending this money?
Is it more of a maturity thing then, do you think? I mean, everybody's trying to get their DevOps stuff together, and now they're trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah, I think it's DevOps in general is a maturity thing in that nobody has really found the secret key. Maybe you guys have, right? But nobody has found the secret key in terms of, I have one successful two-pizza team, and how do I get 10 successful two-pizza teams? Wow, I use the same rules that I've used for the one, but the other one is not that successful. What's going on?
Okay,
so,
what do you think?
Yeah, I think Torsten and Chris highlighted something that we see with regards to DevOps starting off at a team level and then trying to expand. With any type of enterprise, you're going to start off and say, let me get this one team as a high-performing IT organization where we can start to institute DevOps practices. What the value stream map concept does, value stream management, value stream mapping does, is say, okay, that's great for a team. How do we expand this out to our ultimate customer, the end customer? From the time I have an idea to the time that I'm actually adding value to that customer, let's map out all those processes. Let's look at all the tools we're using, and are they really adding value? Are they contributing to us getting value out to the customer? Nobody's implementing DevOps just to say, I've implemented DevOps, I'm a nice techie company. They're implementing it to be competitive, to be more innovative, to get greater value to the customer. And if you don't start mapping that out, then you'll lose context. So as a solution vendor, a software vendor, companies like Electric Cloud are providing a view into the value stream. We have a value stream mapping construct where you can literally see, how am I doing for this particular release across all of the other releases in the company. So it's now becoming, as you said a little bit earlier, it will be a thing of normalcy to see companies now say, show me the value stream map, and then say, I don't want to just see the tools you're using or your dashboard. I want to see the value stream map and how I'm adding value to my ultimate customer, my end user.
Right. I think there's actually two interesting points there, and it transcends, it goes above the technical piece. And you guys are starting to talk about it, I think. One is, how do you, first of all, I think value stream becomes sort of a social construct. It uncovers the DNA of the organization. So like you said, how do we go from pizza teams to something else? Every organization is going to be a little bit different. The value stream map, when you do the exercise, will help teams come together and say, well, I thought that process did this, or right? And now you might find out it's not at all the way the process works, and there are multiple processes.
That's correct.
So it brings that transparency and truth so people can say, okay, now we all agree what's the truth. And then the second part is what you were bringing up. How do we align that to the actual business objectives of an organization? And we're at the Enterprise Summit, so the bigger the organization, the more you see this kind of a thing. That translates back down to, okay, where are the bottlenecks, where are the tools, how do we clear it up? But it really starts to talk about the high level, how are teams interacting across the enterprise.
And it's really that transparency that most teams don't have yet, because there's so many different tools. They use different collaboration servers, they use different IDEs, they use different languages, they use different database kinds. A mainframe, some of them, right? Now we talk about AI, how do you build AI? And we talk about AI as code. How do you define that, right? So all has to go into the DevOps process and made visible. And we are talking a lot as if we were already at the 95% mark, when you see customers that are only at the 5 to 10% mark, right?
Yep.
So I kind of get the idea that value stream mapping is going to be a major emphasis for a lot of companies in the next year.
I think it's, they're finding out it's a really important component to really enabling DevOps. And so like from your perspective, right, so the type of things that Electric Cloud provides, where the value stream map actually becomes the way that it gets created inside the tool. And until you do that mapping, and people probably do that, right? I'm going to onboard an application, I'm going to put it in. They've implicitly done a value stream map without knowing it. So now it's being called out as it's really an important ingredient to actually getting it right as you automate bigger and better.
So what else are you guys seeing as far as what's right on the horizon? What do you predict for 2019?
Well, there's a couple of interesting things. One of them is continuous testing, and we've just done a research report on this topic, and we see more and more startups that leverage AI, machine learning. We use all the buzzwords that we can, so I'll say deep learning as well, to check the test cases, to make sure test coverage is full, to make sure the test cases aren't breaking, to consolidate workloads, so that I can basically, with the same number of test engineers, do continuous testing versus before I just did pre-release testing. So that is a very big growth industry that we are currently seeing as an analyst firm. And then the second thing is, I just mentioned that AI as code, artificial intelligence. How do I leverage what is there today, right? The term artificial intelligence, I think we can agree, it's not data from Star Trek, it's more pattern matching, but how do I do the great things that others are doing, that I see Google doing in my DevOps process, right? How do I enhance the process, build a better product, speed up the DevOps process? You guys have this Foresight product where you're looking at condensing and showing the risk of DevOps. So from all sides, basically, AI, how can I leverage it in that process? Those are two of my favorites.
Wesley, what are you seeing?
I agree with Torsten. He stole that thunder and did such a great job. I don't even need to add on to it. I think Torsten's point is probably on the highest on the stack in terms of adding machine learning, deep pattern recognition. I think a second thing I say is security is coming. Quality and security are two different things. We have been very, very adept at adding in quality measures and doing testing, and we see companies adding technologies like SmartBear, Selenium, Cucumber to do better testing. Security got left behind. And now we're seeing security shift left. We have a conference that starts after the DevOps Enterprise Summit called DevSecOps, where we're starting to look at security having its own pipeline with which to check for vulnerabilities. If I go through a pipeline and I downloaded the wrong framework, like a Struts 2 framework that's already vulnerable, the entire pipeline is null and void. I don't care if it passed regression test, performance test, load test, stress test. It is a vulnerable piece of code, and all of that is useless by the time I get into production. It may get exploited. So if some hacker comes in and exploits that vulnerability and then steals personally identifiable information, the entire pipeline is now at risk. So what we see is DevSecOps is pushing security far left so that they can either A, be injected as a series of tasks into an existing pipeline, or have their own rigor and pipeline to vet the capabilities, the components, and the artifacts that we're kind of building and retrieving, and making sure that they're vetted.
Yeah, making security part of the DevOps
Making
process.
security a true part of the DevOps process, and not just, hey, one-liner.
Security as code.
Security is code.
Security is code.
And Chris, I was going to ask you, because DevSecOps is also, becoming a lot more talked about in the DevOps space, and you've got a lot of background in financial services. So how does that factor in as far as compliance goes, as far as all the controls that financial services industries need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I would expand it and say it's security and audit and risk. And the security pieces, I think, are a little bit harder to integrate because security, not that they've been in their own silo, but they've got their own set of tools. It's usually a completely separate organization, right? The audit pieces of it have been a little bit easier, at least in the things that I've done, to say, come on over. If we show you some evidence through this, does that help you? Does that help you? And we've actually, so one of the approaches I take is I will seek out the internal audit folks and say, come here, I want to show you things. Like, people shy from audit. Like, I want them to be my friend. And even external regulators, OCC and these types of things will say, these are the things we're doing, and they're like, this is great, we wish everybody would do. I mean, that's what they're saying. We wish everybody would do that kind of thing. They actually, as long as you can show, and we're not getting rid of controls, by the way, right? We're making the controls passive and part of the process itself. So, we're mitigating risk with either controls or compensating controls. It's not going away. So I think that that's part of it. I do think it's interesting the points you guys bring up, and depending on the organization you're in, when you said, well, what do we see in the next year versus 5 years? It really depends on the organization, right? Because what works for one organization now, they might not be ready, but they could approach something else and say, I can do this in 12 months. So I think, the folks that might be listening to this have an open mind about, well, what can I do now with what I have, right? What's the Arthur Ashe quote? Do what you can with what you have where you are. Something like that, right? So the idea would be everything is code. What works for you today? So
with that then, since every industry has its own kind of special set of DevOps tools and practices, and it's going to be different for everybody, do you kind of see DevOps kind of fragmenting, if you will, or segmenting so that, there's kind of no tool that's kind of a one-size-fits-all tool anymore, that everything's going to be, customized for particular industries?
I don't know if it'll customize per industry necessarily, but I've always had the approach that when we say we're going to do DevOps, it's going to be a framework. Like, what outcomes do we want? And there are always a couple of tools, maybe open source, maybe commercial, that usually fit the bucket. So it really is a matter of, what's the risk appetite, what's the financial profile, but it's really about the framework. And what you really, I think the mindset to have is, can I design a delivery process so that if a better tool comes along, I can swap it in? And that's a different way of looking at it, because now you need to make sure your tools are modular to some degree. Now, nothing is free. And I actually think the deploy piece is the hardest, because it extends out to all the other tools. But I think you think of it that way.
Yeah, the only point I would add to that, and what Chris is saying is so true, it rings so true, is that I see over the next year or two, we're going to eventually converge. When we look at an enterprise, you don't see 7 email systems, 8 payroll systems that I'm going to pay these employees through ADP and these through Paycom and these through some other system. There are some convergences that are necessary to run an enterprise. I believe pipeline orchestration will ultimately start to converge. We don't need 70 pipeline tools, just like we don't need 70 email tools. We don't need Lotus Notes, Microsoft Exchange, and then 50 others. We have to start converging on a couple of things, and then allow the teams the flexibility to use other tools within the DevOps ecosystem on their own. But there's certain things that have to eventually converge, because it makes it hard. Because if you have too many teams using so many different pipeline tools which govern the process that Chris and Torsten were talking about when it talks about security, audit, compliance, and my delivery system, I don't want 50 million delivery systems. I mean, you think about it now. When we do delivery, whether it's DevOps and we ship all this stuff back, we don't want to use 7 different companies. You want to use a FedEx.com or UPS. You want one system to deliver it so that you can build relationship and get an understanding.
One path to production, somebody said this last year, I think, at this show, and the interesting piece is that it's difficult, right? Because we have so many different systems and technologies. Java is still everywhere. Microsoft is in a lot of accounts. Python. they're all there, and standardization is critical there, but that is, I think, the biggest pain point, right? How do we get there? How do we populate those dashboards to get the value stream transparent if data comes from here, from there, from everywhere, and everybody has an excuse for why they have to slightly modify it before they can put it in there, or let's put a weight in front of it, or let's not count that part, right? So I think that consolidation aspect is an important one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. That's actually the conversation I was having at breakfast not too long ago. And you're absolutely right. I'm glad you picked up or amplified that, because there's a creative piece. The creative piece kind of stops when it hits source control check-in. At that point, you want a very predictable process with one set of tooling, so that you know you have full control over it. You have to, all right, because you can't have teams deploying different things.
Yeah,
so.
and I was just on the plane thinking about artificial intelligence as code and what it entails, and counting the hyperparameters, all the configuration elements that you can have, the data pipeline, and how you need to version that too. Basically all the different aspects, selecting the algorithm, refining the algorithm, selecting how many layers your network should have. All of those things should be checked into any repository or joint repository. And then you can make it reproducible. And the reason why I was looking this up is there were a couple of really big headlines recently in the journals about horrible letdowns of AI tools, right?
Right.
And why they're not reliable. And then I read into those and I think, holy hell, what do people expect, right? I mean, this is not, do they expect Star Trek-like technology when, we have a totally different approach to AI, which is pattern matching. Let's remember, it's pattern matching, right? If we pattern match, we need to make it reproducible, we need to define everything, and we need to be realistic about what we expect. So
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that AI means different things to different people. So as long as you can get the expectation set up, then maybe they won't be so disappointed. So, okay, last question. 5 years from now, where do you guys see DevOps? Chris, we'll start with you.
It's something I think that Gene has been saying quite a bit. We see organizations becoming, if you ask one question around DevOps and say, what do you think it is? Everybody's going to have a different answer except for one area. They're going to say it's about culture. And everybody would agree at some level it's about culture. And so I think what you're probably going to see in 5 years is the organizations that survive and make it through it have actually embraced the ability to become learning organizations and to really use their people as their biggest assets.
Okay, great. Torsten?
Yeah. I'm the analyst. I should have a nice crystal ball, right? So it is that state of continuously releasing. I remember we had a panel here last year where we talked about the biggest pain point in DevOps, and that was compliance. And now we have GDPR there, and I think it has become even larger. And the reason why it's so large is because we are lacking this integration and orchestration and automation of the processes, because if release is a constant state of mind, then I don't have to all the time worry about, oh my god, in 2 weeks we are releasing, nobody can go on vacation anymore, and everybody breathe a little bit shallower now, and so that state of continuous releasing, I think, is something that we will solve within the next 5 years, including we have the continuous testing, we have most things as code, so we can roll back instantaneously. We stop being so crazy about containerizing everything in Kubernetes and seeing that as a main thing. We see the pendulum swinging back on this one a little bit, which is good, because it should be really independent of the deployment technology, right? We stop emphasizing containers over VMs, over FAS, over PaaS, and PaaS didn't work because following reasons it doesn't matter. It's all about the state of release, right? And I should be able to release every day in the evening. You check your code in, you build it, you do your various tests, and then some real life users will use it. If it's only 5 of them, right? And you get some feedback tomorrow, and that's where we're going.
Okay, great. Wesley?
Mine is, again, they covered most of it. Mine is pretty quick. I think we'll go from DevOps at the team level to DevOps at the corporate level.
Yes.
Right now, I think that I would say is that it's all team level implementations. I would think in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll start to see corporate-wide adoption of DevOps, and it's no longer just on the team level.
Well, I hope that happens before 5 years. But
I would hope so,
we'll
too.
See. We'll
What
see.
we thought 5 years ago.
All right.
I would like to offer a caution, though. Everybody, we talk about the tools and testing and everything else. Everybody seems to forget about the data piece. And
That's another
right,
thing.
and it's until you actually get control of your data and can mask it and protect it appropriately, it's really hard to do any testing in the cloud. So that I don't hear a lot about it, and that actually worries me a little bit.
All right, all
That's a
right.
good point.
Nice word of caution to end things with. So thank you very much, Wesley Pullen,
Thank you.
Torsten Volk, and Chris Nowak. Thank you all for joining me today. Great conversation.